Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross from PTCGRadio, and we are ready to go with the stream from UK Nationals. This is going to be round one, showcasing Joe Bernard's Eeveelutions deck and the lovely Jake Walvin's Seismitoad Shaymin deck. Now, I must point out before we get going properly here that this was a game recorded as part of a live stream that went out over the internet from UK Nationals, so if you hear references to things that don't quite make sense, or me talking about tweeting in or things of that nature, do bear in mind that this was part of a Nationals live stream, so it's not going to be exactly like the other videos which I put up on this lovely YouTube channel of mine, but it is very, very good. We got a good game here. Hopefully you'll enjoy the commentary as well. So enjoy this lovely game from UK Nationals, and make sure you check back regularly. We are going to have a whole host of games from UK Nationals leading up to the finals for both the juniors, seniors and masters division. So enjoy this video and make sure you like, subscribe and stick your comments down below. Good morning, or depending on where you are in the world, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. We are live from UK Nationals. No one's actually watching yet, unfortunately, but we're also recording this, so if you're listening to this on my YouTube channel at a bit of a later date, then that will explain why some of the commentary sounds a little bit like I'm not recording for my YouTube channel, because quite frankly, I'm not. I'm recording it live, and hopefully at some point we're actually going to have some viewers, and that will make me very, very happy. So we've got a fairly interesting game for you here, hopefully. We've got Joe Bernard on the left and we've got Jake Walvin on the right. Both fairly well-known UK players with a fair bit of experience of top cutting and playing interesting decks, and in, shall we say, in one of their situations, the occasional disqualification. But we won't get into that. So I do know that we have got Joe on the left. He's going to be playing Leafeon, Raichu, and some other little techs in there. He's got an interesting little deck going on, which is quite funky. On the right, Jake, I've had a quick chat to him this morning, and he's probably told me what he's playing. If I remember correctly, he's playing Shaymin. I'm not 100% on that, but I believe he's going to be playing Shaymin. So Joe here has gone for, let's say, a slightly unusual deck. He's going for the stage ones, trying to counter the format, if you will. So he's got the Leafeon in there to try and go for the Seismitoad, hitting for the weakness, and he's got the Raichu there to try and hit for the much hyped Rayquaza. And it looks like we've actually got some viewers now, so hello to people. We've got Joe Bernard on the left, he's going to be playing Raichu Leafeon, and we've got Jake Walvin on the right, who I believe, if I remember correctly, is playing Seismitoad. Now the good news is here that I have the cooperation of everyone around the venue, all the judges, organisers, players, etc. It's full of lovely people, so rather than just doing a random table, I'm actually being given a printout of the pairings every round, and I'm running around and asking people what they're playing. So rather than just getting random people every round, what we should hopefully be getting is good players playing interesting decks. So I'm going to try and pick quite good matchups for you every round. Save having some, shall we say, less experienced players playing some less well-rounded decks. So Joe on the left is a little bit of a newer player. He's been going for a little while. He's had a little bit of success top cutting here and there. He's been playing weird decks. He's been running around with things like Fairy Box with Seismitoad. The point of that deck being that you essentially, it's kind of a bit like a fairy deck, except you've also got Quaking Punch for Seismitoad, but with all the healing and max potion and all of that you would expect. He also played Speed Florges at a recent regional, doing quite well. Jake has always been more of a traditional player, playing decks like Plasma and Blastoise and Virizion Genesect, and tends to stick to a bit of the top decks, and that actually is bearing out in the choices today, with Jake, I believe, playing Shaymin, which is a fairly standard, fairly safe choice, and Joe going for the far more unusual Stage 1 stuff. Now, Jake is also a slightly more renowned player. He's played at Worlds a number of times. He's qualified for Worlds the last couple of years. Well known around the UK. I believe it was 2 years ago he managed to get to the top 4 of UK Nationals, losing when he played 2 supporters in one turn, when he was 1 game up in a best of 3 in top 4, and had game 2 completely sewn up. And let's remember, of course, that had he won that game, he would have ended up in the final with a paid trip to Worlds. So that was a very, very expensive 2-supporter turn. Cost him about £2,000, which roughly equates to about $3,000 US. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for the quick delay there. We are back. There was a repairing, but luckily the people on stream have been repaired against themselves. Quite luckily for Jake, because I don't know if anybody caught his prizes as he flipped them over at the end of that kind of non-game there. But his prizes included 2 Shaymin, 2 Crushing Hammer, a Verbank, cards which would be pretty useful against a Leafeon deck. Now, you'll also notice there in Joe's discard pile, we see a Golbat. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we're not just talking Leafeon, we're talking Leafeon bats. So Joe there, he's got an Execute to start, which is... it's not ideal, but it's not the worst thing that ever happened. Because it's only got 30 HP, it's going to go down quite quickly, and then it's in the discard pile and can be used to... propagate it back. Use the ability Propagate, which allows you to put it back into your hand. Not Joe's preferred starter, of course. Now, Joe has got an Eevee down. That's the Eevee that's got the evolving ability, whereby you can attach a basic energy and evolve it into a Pokemon of that energy type. Now, he has attached what looks to be a double colourless energy, which I've talked about this before, I am not a huge fan of doing things like that against decks like Seismitoad, because you know that DCE is going to be discarded. As we see Jake play an Acrobike there. I would be very, very surprised. Jake's going to have to draw badly or flip badly to not get rid of that DCE. It's bad enough having a basic energy down where they can play a Crushing Hammer, but here Jake can just play an Enhanced Hammer down, and that's going to lose Jake the energy. Now, it did get him one more card from the Shaymin drop, but I still don't think it was probably worth it. I would have liked to have seen him hold on to that energy drop. Because one of the advantages Joe's got in this game is that he's got 1 energy attackers. And that blunts the effectiveness of these Toad decks a little bit, in that they're constantly trying to get rid of your energy. So your counter to that essentially is, well, I only need 1 energy, so I can just attach 1 energy every turn. And even if you've gotten rid of my energy the previous turn, I can still go ahead and just attach 1 energy and attack. So, it's not the end of the world if that DCE gets knocked off, but I think he could have played it just a little bit safer. Now, here's the counter-argument to what I've just said. Maybe Joe gets a Grass Energy. Maybe Joe uses that Grass Energy to evolve the Eevee into a Leafeon, at which point he's now got free energy on the Leafeon, and now he can start doing a fair bit of damage. Let's not forget, of course, that Joe plays all of those bats. So, like what I was saying before we actually started in my little Here Comes the First Crushing Hammer, and it is a heads, so it didn't really matter that it was a DC. Whatever it is, it would have gone. And, there's a head ringer on a Shaymin. Nobody really cares about that. So, although I was saying in the pre-game here, I was talking about the fact that Leafeon often falls just a little bit short of the KO, Joe's got the bats, and that kind of really picks up the fall. If he can drop a Golbat and use the ability to put, 1 damage counter on a Seismitoad, or 2 damage counters on a Seismitoad, or whatever, dropping enough bats, then he's going to be able to then get the 1-hit KO with the Leafeon. Although I suppose it's not really a 1-hit KO if you've already done the damage with the bats, but, I'm counting it. So, Jake did take the KO on the Execute there, and it kind of had to be done. So we see the Leafeon go down, we see the energy, it's another double colourless, which is unfortunate because he's now only got 2 left in his deck, assuming none are prized. Now, he does do, as I said before, 80 damage, and that's not going to be enough, and there goes, I believe, a Xerosic there, the supporter, which gets rid of the Leafeon. And we see a Super Scoop Up, which comes up as a heads, and this is exactly what I suggested might happen earlier. Jake is basically taking advantage of all these tricks that Seismitoad has got to just stop Joe playing, essentially. He's getting rid of all Joe's energy, he's healing off all the energy Joe has put on the field, and Joe's entire contribution for his first 2 turns now stands at an Eevee manually evolved into a Leafeon, and a benched Shaymin. That's all he's managed to achieve now. And now we see the laser go down. So even though that Leafeon does have resistance to Seismitoad's Quaking Punch, and it only does 10 damage, well, if you're doing 30 damage between turns with laser, it really doesn't matter. Now, it's doing 30 damage here, obviously, because of the muscle band, and they're just trying to work out which way is asleep. Easy way to remember it. Sleep, L comes up earlier, left, and Paralysed, R comes up earlier, so Paralysed goes to the right. So they have got it the right way round. It's good to be pedantic. So Jake here is in a very strong position. Annoyingly, it is going to take him 2 attacks to get the KO, but I don't think he's going to be terribly upset about that. He'll do 30 damage with a Quaking Punch. Oh no, he hasn't got the Verbank down yet. So that is going to be interesting. If he doesn't get the Verbank, he's actually not going to get the KO next turn. Yes, he will, if he gets the Verbank down this turn or next turn. So the Verbank isn't particularly important yet. He'll do 30 damage here, 40 with a Poison. It will then have 50 damage on it coming into Jake's turn. And with no Verbank next turn, it will finish on 90. With a Verbank this turn or next turn, then that Leafeon's going down at the end, the end of Jake's next turn. And let's face it, it's not going down this turn because the maximum damage Jake can do is 60. So the Leafeon's essentially got 1 turn to try and earn its money, and then it's going to be dead. Now, you'll notice Jake's benched a Jinx there. Now, Jinx has got a fun little ability which just allows you to heal 10 damage from your active Pokemon per turn. It's not terribly powerful, it's not terribly exciting, but it just allows you to heal a little bit of damage off. Now, in a mirror match, that's huge. What it can often do is screw up the math for your opponent so that your Seismitoad stays alive just for 1 turn longer. And obviously 1 turn longer means, you know, the prize trade gets all kinds of screwed up for your opponent. It could end up being the difference. And it's going to come in very, very handy here with the bats. We've talked about the fact that the Leafeon maths doesn't quite work out without some extra damage, and that extra damage is going to come from the bats. But if Jake is able to use Jinx to heal off the damage done by the bats, then Joe is going to have a difficult time trying to do enough damage. Now, one problem Joe's got here is he's drawing dead. He's got nothing. Now, that's not to say he's drawing completely dead, but remember, he's trainer locked, so if he is drawing anything, and there goes the Verbank City Gym that I said Jake needed in order to get the KO this turn. He's going to go up by 2 prizes, and Joe's just had to use Propagation to get the Execute back on the bench, so that he could promote it as a sacrificial lamb so he didn't have to give up the Shaymin. And just like that, Joe throws the head ringer at Jake in what I can only assume was a fit of rage, and game 1's over. That's the problem with some of these counter decks. They are always just a little bit dodgy. They're always just a little bit on the edge here. So Jake goes up 1-0, and Joe is going to have a hard time coming back from this. Now, the good news is he's obviously going to be going first this game, and that's good. You'll notice we've got the technology set up here, so I've been able to tell you Jake won that game. And all those people that were asking on my YouTube channel, just search PTCGRadio on YouTube, asking for me to put names on the people, you've got your wish. And I can't take any credit. I should give a big shout out at this point to Terry Goodacre. He's a lovely chap who's been setting up this stream and organising it so all you lovely people can join in with the stream. Speaking of joining in, I have got slow but just about access to my Twitter here, so if you want to tweet me at the Wassy, I might be able to deal with some tweets that you guys send me as we get going here. Now, first tweet, Aidan Wardler said, "Good game, Joe. Cake is on fire." And no, the stream has not yet been banned for extreme content. We'll see how it goes. So Jake's 1 game up here, and he's really got to be the favourite. Joe certainly has tricks. Now, you'll notice in that previous game, Joe couldn't get any of his bats going, and that's quite a big thing. He couldn't put any pressure on Jake. But the other thing is he's got to be very careful with the bats. He's got to be very careful with how he actually goes about playing them, because if he puts down the bats too early, does the damage to Jake a little bit too early, then we're going to end up in a position where Jake could just heal the damage off, and the bats have essentially done nothing. Now, the other reason to get the bats active are that they've essentially all got free retreat. I mean, a Zubat doesn't quite have free retreat, but it has an ability which gives it free retreat if it doesn't have any energy attached. And it's never going to have any energy attached, unless you're absolutely desperate to do 10 damage to a bench Pokemon. So what that means is Joe would have some free retreaters, and it means that, like in the previous turn where he had to propagate and put the Execute up as a sacrificial lamb, what he would be able to do instead is he would be able to, just put, say, a Crobat up there, and Crobat can take a Quaking Punch with a laser, and then he can retreat the Crobat, so he's not broken the trainer lock, but he's bought himself a turn there. He's been able to do something for that turn, or at least stop Jake taking a prize. But it's going to be a long road back for Joe here. Joe's best chance of winning is essentially going to be getting those Leafeons out, and as sad as this sounds, hoping that Jake whiffs his Super Scoop-Ups. Because Joe, now he can get one-hit KOs, but he's going to need 2 energy, one being a DC on the Leafeon, and we saw in the previous game that against these Toad decks, it's very hard to keep your energy out. He's going to need 3 energy on a Leafeon. He's going to need to hit heads on the coin flip for the attack, and he's going to have to drop the bats at the right time to get the KO. And he's going to have to do that 3 times. So it's going to take, essentially, it's going to take Jake whiffing some flips here. If Jake can keep hitting his Super Scoop-Ups and his Crushing Hammers, there is essentially nothing Joe can do to win here. If Jake struggles to set up a little bit, or for instance, if he whiffs his Super Scoop-Ups, or if he whiffs his Crushing Hammer, then we've got a chance. But outside of something like that happening, it's not looking great for Joe here. Like I say, there is a chance, but unfortunately, I don't see Joe winning this game. But anything could happen. One of the advantages is that a lot of the time when I record videos for my YouTube channel, it's from tournaments where even if I haven't seen the game, I'll know that one player makes cut and one player doesn't, so I'll be able to know who wins. Or I'll know that one player goes XO. Here, because we are recording live, anything could happen. And something I should point out here, and this is very important for me, Joe is not wearing an Oakland Raiders t-shirt. I would not let anyone on the stream wearing an Oakland Raiders t-shirt. If you are an Oakland Raiders fan, let me apologise. I don't mean to be rude, but I'm a Chargers fan, so you probably hate me too, and that's fine. It is a Tuscan Raiders shirt. It is a quite humorous Star Wars spoof. So, Joe's going to get to go first here. He has finally got a basic, but there has been a mulligan. So he starts off there with a Pikachu. Pikachu is hopefully going to evolve into Raichu, and it's got the attack for a double colourless energy that does 20 damage times the amount of your bench Pokemon. The problem is he's also got 60 HP, so a Quaking Punch with a Muscle Band Laser or with a Laser Verbank will get the KO. Jake has started with Jinx, which is not the worst starter ever, but he's going to want to get that out of the... He's going to want to get that out of the active sooner rather than later. Now, it's not the end of the world, because we've seen he plays several Super Scoop-Ups. His ace spec is Scoop-Up Cyclone. So, he's going to be able to get that Jinx out of the active, probably, but obviously he would much rather start with a Seismitoad or something like that, rather than going for a Jinx. So Joe gets a double colourless energy down again, and he uses the Ultra Ball. He gets rid of a Juniper and a Raichu there, which is not a pretty discard. I can only assume he's got a Juniper in hand to play. And yes, he does. Oh, that is not a pretty hand. For anyone that missed that, he had 3 Juniper or Sycamore, but I'm going to call them Juniper, so feel free to send me abusive tweets at the Wassy about that specifically. Try not to be too personal. 3 Sycamore and 2 DCE in his opening hand, and he's got to play them. He hasn't really got any choice. So although I talked in the previous game about it not always being the cleverest thing to drop that double colourless energy early because Jake's going to get rid of it, he didn't really have a choice. So he's playing Trainer's Mail there, an interesting little card. It lets you look at the top 4 cards of your deck and take a trainer, and he's used it to get a Silver Bangle. Now, he's setting himself up for a nice turn 2, but I get the feeling here that we could end up in a situation where Jake's just going to completely ruin his day, because Jake's going to play Startling Megaphone to try and get rid of that Silver Bangle. He's going to play Enhanced Hammer and Crushing Hammer, but more than all of that, and we see a Repeat Ball, I believe that is, so he can either get a Shaymin, or he can get a Pikachu, or he can get a Zubat, but he couldn't, for instance, use that to get an Eevee or a Raichu with which to evolve next turn. You've got to get a Pokemon that you've already got. So it's, do I have few enough cards in my hand to warrant me getting a Shaymin and play that and draw some more cards, or do I want to go and get a Zubat? Or maybe even a Raichu with which to attack the following turn. He's chosen to go for the Shaymin, and that makes sense. He wants to get as set up as he can in this one turn where he isn't trainer locked. Now there's, I suppose, a chance Jake's going to miss a trainer lock next turn, but it's not something that Joe can rely on. Joe has got to assume that Jake's got the trainer lock next turn, so he's basically got to be in a position where he's got as much down as he can this turn. He needs to get an Eevee or a Pikachu, so he's got something to attack with next turn, and he really could do with getting a Zubat as well, although obviously he's only got room for another 2 bench Pokemon, so he's got to watch that. Now, I talked about Jake ruining Joe's day with all kinds of trainer cards. Let's not forget, we've got a 60 HP Pokemon, Pikachu there, and here comes the Crushing Hammer, and it begins. Now, let's not forget that he also had to Juniper the first DCE there. Here we go with a laser, and it is a heads. So all we need here is a Quaking Punch with a Muscle Band, and we are there. But it looks like he's had a bit of a slower start. Oh, no. There comes the Verbank, and there comes the Toad with the Muscle Band, and the Scoop Up Cyclone, and does he have a DCE? If he does, that Pikachu is going down, and then there is nothing left. So there goes the actual Juniper from Jake, and if he's got a DCE, this is going to be a very sad turn for Joe indeed. That Quaking Punch will do oh, there we go. So the Quaking Punch is going to do 50. You can then add 30 damage with the poison. Pikachu dies, and we are seeing a near repeat of the first game. So although like I say, I've handpicked this game for you. I'm trying to bring you good players. I'm trying to bring you interesting decks, and I believe I have. Unfortunately, when we actually get into the games, I can't guarantee what's going to happen. And unfortunately, we're not seeing the most hardcore of games here, I think is fair to say. Now, he's put the DCE on the Shaymin. Now, what he is able to do here is do 30 damage with the Shaymin, and then put the Shaymin and the DCE back in his hand. It's a way to preserve some energy, but it's 6-hit KOing the Seismitoad. And 6-hit KOing a Seismitoad, while they can be using Super Scoop Up, is not the most effective way of doing it. Jake's already up by 1 prize, and he's about to use Quaking Punch to go up by a 2nd prize, and quite frankly, I don't think this is going to be the longest game ever. Joe is now trainer locked, and he is going to struggle to keep getting stuff out under the trainer lock. He needs early setups here. He needs to get, a couple of Raichu or a couple of Eevees and a couple of Zubats down on the first turn of the game so that he can keep going there. Now, I believe that's a Pokemon fan club. We are seeing a little bit of glare here, but that looks like a Pokemon fan club, and that means he's going to be able to search for any 2 basic Pokemon. The problem is he's 2 prizes down, and he really is going to need one heck of a start in order to actually, be taking KOs, and I just don't think his deck's got it in him at this point. I think Joe's deck is capable of winning this matchup, I do, but unfortunately, he's got to get set up nicely, and that hasn't happened in either of the games. So I think at this stage it seems almost like a bit of a sad inevitability that this game is not long for this world, shall we say. But he's still got a chance. There are things that he can do. All it takes is to get rid of 1 energy. And we know that we only see 4 energy in these Seismitoad decks. So it's not outside the realms of possibility that he could get rid of all that energy and that Jake could whiff energy for a couple of turns. Or that he could draw dead for a couple of turns, and then he can get right back into it. But it's going to take something along those lines. So let's hope he can pull something out here. Now, we see a Virizion EX coming down from Joe. He does play basic grass. Now, one of the beautiful things about Joe's deck is that, he's playing Leafeon, and he's playing, presumably there's a Flareon in there, and he's playing Raichu, so he's not tied to any particular kind of basic energy. He's playing the grass for the Leafeon, so just make it all grass, pop in a Virizion, and now he's going to be immune to laser flips. So what he's basically done there is he's left the Shaymin in the active, but he's got the grass energy on there so that it can't be affected by lasers. Unless, of course, Jake hits a crushing hammer, in which case there will be no grass energy attached to Shaymin. The ability of Virizion will cease to exist, and then it's Laser City. But maybe this will buy Joe the turn or two he needs. Now, the other thing which must be pointed out, of course, is that initially Jake just dropped down that head ringer on the Shaymin just to waste a card, essentially. Get it out of his hand so he could draw more cards with his own Shaymin. But now it's in a fantastic position where that Shaymin needs free energy to do its attack. Now, you just saw him hit a heads on a crushing hammer there, which means Joe cannot attach a double colourless energy and do the attack. That Shaymin is not going to be attacking next turn, which means Joe's going to have to get it out of the active. But, of course, in order to get it out of the active, he's going to have to waste an energy. And he has no energy on the field to waste. So even if he retreats to Shaymin, he's going to have to put something active with which he can't attack. So that head ringer on the Shaymin, although initially, and it looked like, and it may even have been the fact that he was just putting it on there to waste a card, it's actually come in very, very handy indeed. Now, I don't know Joe's deck. I unfortunately don't have deck lists. I'm hoping that tomorrow, and we will be broadcasting the top cut of this tournament tomorrow, so please obviously do tune back in for that. Hopefully tomorrow, because there's going to be so many fewer deck lists, I'm hoping that I'll be able to have the deck list in front of me as I'm recording these. I can tell you a bit more about their deck. But looking at Joe's deck here, I'm just not entirely sure how Joe can go about winning this game, because he's not doing enough damage when his deck's going very, very well. And we see the heads on the Super Scoop up there. It just allows him to get the Muscle Band off the Shaymin and onto the Seismitoad. And it also means he can now drop the Shaymin, use set up to draw a few more cards if he wishes. Or indeed, one more card. And it's Super Scoop Up City, apparently. We see him hit another one. So he Shaymins for another card. Not something I would usually recommend, because he's not desperate for any cards here. Shaymining for one card can be a bit of a pain at times, because, every Shaymin you use now is a Shaymin you can't use next turn, and for instance, he doesn't have a second DCE down. So maybe he's searching for that second DCE, but of course he doesn't want to drop it for fear of the Leafeon. So really, all Jake needs here is just to be Quaking Punching, maybe dropping a laser, maybe he's searching for a laser. Maybe he is just searching for that second DCE, just so he's got it in his hand. But he's drawing an awful lot of cards here. So it seems like he's gone for Lissandra's trump card. He has used a Trainer's Mail, that card that Joe was using a second ago. Seems to be getting a bit more traction, that card. It's not been a very hyped card from the set. And when I finally drop my top 10 cards of Phantom Forces, I believe it's gonna make kind of a fleeting appearance around about number 8 or something like that. It's not a card I'm hugely fond of, but you can see here, he needed Lissandra's Last Resort, so he's able to use the Trainer's Mail to get it. So, Jake here is just going to keep Quaking Punching, and Joe is going to reevaluate his options. He's going to try and think about what he can actually do to try and get back into this game. He's going to need some attackers down. He's going to probably need some Zubats down as well. That would be the ideal here. He needs to get some attacks going. Now, if he can get a couple of attacks going, and Jake can just miss a Super Scoop Up and not hit the laser for a turn or two, not get rid of his energy, that's a lot of ifs and buts, then he's going to be doing all right. But it looks like Joe has just immediately just passed. He's got nothing to do. Jake has gone and got the head ringer on the Virizion. Now, the Virizion is not an ideal option here. It's not a great option, because one of the problems is that it needs 2 energy to attack, and as we've seen, Jake can get rid of all that energy quite quickly. So it's going to be difficult, but here it's now going to take free energy, which could be a basic grass and then a double colourless, but of course that double colourless is going to come off pretty quickly. So it's not looking great here. So we see the laser come down. And the really bad thing here for Joe is that the maths works beautifully in Jake's favour. The Quaking Punch is going to be done for 50. Add the laser damage is going to be 80. And of course we had the 30 damage, or 50 whatever was on before, and he's going to die. Now even a fresh Shaymin, and we finally see a Leafeon come down. He's got a lot of cards in his hand. He has got some energy. Now if he's got a basic energy, he wants to lead with a basic energy. What he needs to do here is drop a basic energy and just use the first attack, which will do 80 damage. Hope it doesn't get gone the following turn, so that he can drop a DCE, and then even with a Tails on the attack, he'll be doing 120 and get the KO. So he really needs a basic energy here, and it doesn't need to be a grass for the first attack, but it does for the second. So he really needs a basic grass here. Do the first attack, hope he keeps his energy, hope Jake doesn't hit a super scoop up, and then he's going to be able to drop a DCE next turn, and we know he's got one of those in hand, and he'll be able to get the KO. At which point, Jake doesn't have any energy on the field, so maybe he whiffs the double colourless? He'd have to whiff it for the following 2 turns, so it's not... Shall we say we're far from an ideal situation here. Joe is not in the best position he could be in, but it is far from over. There is always a chance here. But it's gonna take Jake whiffing. We're at the stage now where, unfortunately, and I don't want this to sound terribly mean, we're at the stage here where we're not really looking to see whether Joe whiffs, whether Jake does something good or whether Joe does something good. We're just looking to see if Jake whiffs. Because unless Jake whiffs, this does seem to be a foregone conclusion. As you can see on the screen, Jake is up 1-0, and it's all going Jake's way here. Joe's got a fun little counter deck, and he's got certainly a fighting chance against Seismitoad, but he's relying on things going wrong for them, and unfortunately that's not actually happening at the moment. Now he is playing another Leafeon. I didn't quite catch which one it is, but there is a Furious Fist Leafeon, which for 1 grass energy does 30 damage plus sleep, which would be quite handy against a Seismitoad deck. You can hope that they fall asleep and don't wake up, and that would be quite funky. It's not the best card ever, but it would be something which, again, it could potentially be quite good against Seismitoad. It could give you a little bit of an advantage. It could be quite handy. There is also a promo Leafeon out, which does 10 damage, 40 on a coin flip for 1 energy, or for grass and a colourless, it does 40 damage, and you get to attach a basic energy from a discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. I believe he's playing one of the Furious Fist Leafeons. I believe we saw that earlier. So maybe that could be a bit of help here. You know, get it out, attach a grass energy, you can do 30 damage, and put him to sleep. Unfortunately, it's not coming out here. What is coming out here is the Leafeon. It's got a retreat cost of 2. So he ain't getting out of the active anytime soon, especially under trainer lock. So, yeah. Now Jake's in a pretty good position here, if he can get rid of Joe's energy. In that another attack here from Joe is going to do 80 damage. He's going to put the Seismitoad on 160. There's no Zubats down, so Joe's not threatening damage from any bats anytime soon. So Jake doesn't need to hit a Super Scoop up this turn, and interestingly, he gets rid of at least 1 DCE there. But he needs a hammer here. Enhanced or Crushing either would do. Now, we've just seen him play a supporter, so there will be no Xerasic, no Team Flare Grunt. He needs to get rid of that energy. Now, we see a Headringer coming down on the Shaymin here. It's not the most important thing in the world, but it just allows him to... It just allows him to stop Joe doing any Shaymin shenanigans. So we see 2 Super Scoop Ups come down, and you'll see he went for the Shaymin, not for the Seismitoad with a Super Scoop Up, because as previously mentioned, he's not in a hurry to heal that Seismitoad. What he really wants is more cards, so that he can try and get rid of the energy attached to Leafeon, and actually he's going to want a laser at some point as well. He's going to need a laser. Just because otherwise he's going to be 4-hit KOing that Leafeon, and he's going to be giving Joe turns to get going. And if Joe can get a couple of turns to stream together some big attacks with Leafeon, there is still an outside chance he can start at least making a little bit of a comeback in this game. So, if you joined us a little bit later, we are in Round 1 of the UK National Championships. We got Joe Bernard on the left playing Leafeon bats with some Raichu action. And on the right, we have Jake Walvin, who is playing the Seismitoad Shaymin deck, which many people, not least of all myself, have been hyping round and about since the new set came out. Jake is up by 1-0. He's up by 4 prizes to 0. And it's not looking great for Joe. As I keep saying, there is an outside chance, but he's got to string some attacks together. Now, a question, so he's got a DCE there, but he's not going to get the KO. And that's the problem. He's going to be on 160. 160 isn't enough to get the KO. Now, Jake needs to get the Super Scoop up. Now it's a little bit more important. Although, as long as he can get another DCE down to try and build up a second Seismitoad, and there comes down the Crushing Hammer with a Tails, as long as he can get a DCE to get a second Seismitoad set up, it doesn't really matter if he loses a couple of prizes. Now, obviously, he'd rather not. Obviously, he'd rather keep going. But it's not the end of the world if he loses a couple of prizes on the Seismitoad here. It's not going to be the worst thing ever. Now, he does get the laser, and that's important to try and make the maths work out a little bit better. Unfortunately, there is a scoop-up Cyclone, so, yeah, now he's healed it all. And because he's got a Seismitoad on the bench with a Muscle Band, he can just use the DCE he scooped up to attach the new Seismitoad, and he's off and running. And as a little tip, if you're playing these Seismitoad decks, you do always want to try and keep a second Seismitoad on the bench, because then you get to do things like that. If you scoop up one Seismitoad, you can use the Muscle Band and a DCE attached to that Seismitoad on the new one to get attacking. So he had the laser, he's got enough damage here, and it really does seem like this game is not long for this world. I should point out, by the way, if you're watching this on Twitch, I can't see the comment section of Twitch. I'm not on that, I'm afraid. I don't have that shown on my screen. I have my Twitter at @TheWassy. So any questions, comments, queries, or quibbles should be directed there, first of all, not to the, at least if you want me to answer them, don't stick them on the comments on Twitch, because I ain't going to get them. Now, a couple people pointing out on Twitter that Jake's deck is super consistent, and they are absolutely correct. It is ludicrously consistent. Now, as I've been talking about on my YouTube channel and on my podcast lately, there are 2 problems with Jake's deck. One problem is, if you whiff the early Shaymin, you can really get yourself into a little bit of bother here. If you whiff the early Shaymin, then you don't get set up, and it gives your opponent a few turns to get something going. And also, you're only playing 4 DCE, so especially if your opponent can use Xerosic or Team Flegrunt to get rid of them under Trainer Lock or get a KO or 2, there are situations where you end up not having any energy. Now, you will notice here that Jake is down to a single prize, and there is a 40 HP Zubat on the bench. So if Jake has got a Lysandre here, all he needs to do is use the Lysandre, pull up the Zubat, and he's going to be able to get the KO for the win this turn. And he's going Trainer's Mail, must be digging for the Lysandre, one would imagine. Because if he can find that, like I say, it will be game over. He can Quaking Punch for 50 right now. The Zubat's only got 40. So it's not going to do it, unfortunately. Now, he is obscuring what he actually got from the Trainer's Mail, which is a little bit annoying. It looked a little bit like he might have actually got another Trainer's Mail there. But essentially here, Jake just needs to dig for that Lysandre. Oh, no, it's not, sorry, it's an Acro Bike. So he's playing the Acro Bike. Again, he's just trying to get a few more cards here. He needs to dig for that Lysandre. So he's getting rid of the Ultra Ball, so he must presumably have something he wants. He's got the Super Scoop Up. And he had to go for the Super Scoop Up. He can't just Ultra Ball for a Shaymin because he's got a full bench. So, well, he can Ultra Ball for the Shaymin, but he's not going to be able to put the Shaymin down. So it's going to be a waste of time. Oh, he plays a Juniper. That is unfortunate. Because what that means is he's not actually going to be able to get the win this turn. Now, he is going to be able to drop a laser, and there we go. And he's going to be able to do a little bit of damage here or there. But he's not quite in the position yet where he's going to be able to get all this stuff done. He's not going to get the win this turn. Having said that, Joe's trainer locked. Virizion, admittedly Virizion only has a retreat cost of 1, but you still have to waste an energy to retreat him. At which point, well, what are you going to do? If you pay an energy to retreat the Virizion, then you then don't have any energy to attack with anything else. So you'd have to retreat the Virizion into something else, and then you wouldn't be able to attack. I mean, essentially, he'd have to put an energy on the bench. He'd have to hope Jake doesn't get rid of the energy. He'd then have to use a second energy to retreat the Virizion so that he could put the thing active with the first energy to get the KO. Or at least to do an attack. And you can see here, if this all sounds complicated and improbable, that's because, quite frankly, it is. Now, what Jake really wants to be doing here is he still wants to be digging for that Lysandre. Because the best Joe's going to be able to manage next turn is a Golbat. Now, you'll see Joe has got his own stadium down there, and for the life of me, I cannot see what it is through the glare, so I do apologise. What he's really wants to be doing is digging for the Lysandre, because, like I say, best case scenario, Joe gets a Golbat. Well, Golbat's only got 80 HP, so a Quaking Punch with a Verbank Laser would get the KO. And that's, if Joe can get a Golbat, which is at this stage far from a guarantee, given that he's under trainer lock, and it can be hard to get your cards out and set up under trainer lock. And there we have the Verbank City Gym, so it really doesn't matter what stadium Joe was playing, because it's gone. Now, look, oh no, it's back. I spoke too soon. I would imagine it's probably a Dimension Valley. I'm having a think through what it could be. I'm thinking it's probably a Dimension Valley, which means he could potentially attach an energy to Virizion, retreat the Virizion, and then use Dimension Valley to attack for free with Golbat or Crobat, which would then roundly be killed by Seismitoad pretty gosh darn quickly. So Jake there, he's going for the Acro Bike. He's still looking for the Lysandre. Lysandre would be the game here. He'd be able to Lysandre up the Zubat, KO it for the final prize, and that, quite frankly, would be that. He'd be on to round 2 with a 1-0 record. Worth pointing out at this stage, we have 130 Masters even at UK Nationals this year, and we have a top 8. So it's gonna be pretty brutal when it comes down to actually getting into Top Cut. We think, and this isn't based on any calculations, this is based on little more than random guesswork, but we think you're probably going to be looking at about 6 wins, 2 losses for the bubble. 6 wins, 1 draw, 1 loss should get you in, but you might just scrape in with 2 losses if there are no draws and you've got good resistance. So it really is going to take a lot to get into the top 8 here. And of course, I know not everyone always agrees with us, but we've got a lot of good players in the UK. We've got a lot of Worlds players, people with a history and a pedigree of Worlds. Several people, from the UK have Top Cut Worlds in recent years. So it's going to be very difficult to get into Top Cut. So Jake there's just carrying on with a Quaking Punch, and it's not going to take long for that Virizion to die. Joe is going to have to waste an energy retreating it to stop it dying, but then what's he going to put up in its place? If he puts up a Shaymin, the Shaymin dies pretty quickly. If he puts up the Zubat dies pretty quickly. I mean, what he could try and do is just leave the energy on there. Oh, there's a Team Flare Grunt, which means he doesn't have the Lysandre, which is kind of annoying at this stage because Jake's deck is so fast and so consistent. You would really think he'd be able to find the Lysandre. Now, you saw there he played a Team Flare Grunt to get rid of the energy. He then played a Laser because, of course, when you attach the energy to Leafeon, it activates Leafeon's ability, and then it stops him being poisoned, so Jake had to get rid of the energy first. Now, as a kind of, and I've been talking a bit about this recently on the podcast, on the YouTube channel, the order in which you play cards. Jake should have played that Trainer's Mail first. Now, it makes very little difference, but as we're saying here, Jake needs to hit a Lysandre for the game. So, had he played the Trainer's Mail first, he could have seen if there was a Lysandre, at which point, he just wins the game. Otherwise, he could have played the Trainer's Mail, hit the Lysandre, and then ended up in a position where he's not actually able to use it for the game. But having said that, I mean, he might have known there were none left in his deck, and more importantly, yeah, Jake's won. Joe has scooped, because, like I said, there wasn't... If Joe gets set up and is able to use his bats and is able to use his Leafeons, then he's got a pretty good shout there. Outside of that, I'm sorry to say, it's not going to work. So I'm going to go and try and grab Jake, see if we can have a quick chat with him in between rounds. I'm going to stick up the in between round screen. Please don't go anywhere. I'll be back very, very shortly.
Now you can be heard.
Why were we not heard before?
Have we been silent the whole time?
Because I muted it by accident.
Oh my god.
Do you want to start again?
I muted it by accident before.
When?
When you were on the other screen, just to make sure it wasn't going live. I didn't realise it.
Right, okay, so apparently we weren't actually going out then, so I do apologise, and we've dropped a bunch of viewers because of it, so thank you to the technical man, Terry. No shout out to him.
TTCG.
I take back that shout out from earlier. So, we are back. We are literally on a nice, comfortable sofa with... We don't just talk to winners. We're a friendly stream. We speak to losers as well. Hello, Joe.
Hiya, you alright?
Did that same joke 5 minutes ago. It wasn't funny there.
I had a bit more humour the first time.
So, Jake, tell us about your Shaymin deck.
Okay, well, basically, I mean, Quaking Punch shuts a lot of things off, and it's just constant ongoing damage. They can't super scoop up the damage either. And you just run Shaymins because it gives you the tools. You can draw into lasers and Verbanks. It actually allows you to sort of skimp some cuts. So I'm actually only running 3 laser, for example, 2 Verbank. But, I mean, I guess that's standard. But, like, you run 4 Crushing Hammer. Your aim is to draw into them. Against NG Acceleration decks, which don't really exist now, you can actually draw enough hammers in turn to remove all the things. Like, so even against Mega Ray, they can get, like, more than 3 energy on a Mega Ray in one turn, and you can remove it all in one turn. So they can take 2 prizes on the first turn and still not win the game. And that's just why I like the deck. It's horrible. It shouldn't exist. The game's allowed it to exist because Trump card puts everything back in so you can just endlessly flip hammers. Then they can't, like, they draw 1 energy on average for your 4 Crushing Hammers, and so you win that race every time.
It is a horrible, horrible deck. Any matchups you're worried about facing?
Groudon, mostly, I think, because if they just get a Groudon set up, you probably lose.
Yeah, and you're saying when we were talking a minute ago that you can run through the Wobbuffets quickly enough, and you can force their Groudons active. But even if you're up 4 or 5 prizes, as soon as they get that 1 Groudon out,
you lose basically. Yeah.
So Joe, talk us through your deck then. This Leafeon, Bats, Raichu malarkey.
Yeah, well, basically Leafeon Raichu as a normal archetype is just trying to beat Rayquaza and also trying to have a fantastic Groudon matchup. Like, it's pretty much 90-10.
It's a very good Groudon matchup.
Pretty much 95. So, great Groudon matchup. I expected some more Groudon. There's not much hope. I haven't seen many around the tables. I didn't really look too hard, but that's got a great matchup. Raichu's good at pretty much picking off everything. When you consider bats as well, even if people like with Rayquaza are playing Altaria, which most will, the bats can add up the 20s and the 30s to still get the knocks at the 1-hit KOs. I'm playing 3 Bangle, so that we just need 1 Crobat drop to kill stuff like 210 HP Megas, like Manectric. And then Leafeon's in there, really, it is for Toad. It didn't really work out too well against Jake. But it's meant to stall. And then you have teammates. I'm playing 3 teammates in the deck. More pieces, like your second Leafeon count into the Raichu Skyfield, trying to get big turns of 1-hits.
Indeed, and I did incorrectly identify your stadium. It was, of course, a Skyfield.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. And I also misidentified your trainer. I said it was a fan club. It wasn't. It was, of course, a teammates. Yeah. So, mistakes will happen. Don't go and watch Puka instead. Superb. So, what do we think of Top Cut chances then, boys? 130 players, top 8. It's going to be fairly brutal to get in.
Yeah, it's going to be 8 rounds. So, you have to go 6-1-1. Yeah, if I flip like that, maybe.
Yeah.
If I flip like I normally do, probably not.
And Joe, how's the comeback going to come along?
Hopefully in the lower tables I can try and pick up a few wins, snake in that way. I've won a few tournaments that way just by starting off with a loss and then getting to come back on, so it's possible.
It can be really handy sometimes that you get. Sometimes losing round 1's brilliant because you just have tomato cans just for like 3 or 4 rounds to get you back into
and then
it.
you come back, yeah.
Superb. Well, we're going to stay on our comfy couch and we will be back in a few minutes with round 2. I'm going to find you a nice juicy matchup. because I'm going to get a list of everyone playing and I'm going to deliberately pick a good matchup for you. So please don't run anywhere or we'll all feel very lonely, and we'll be back in a few minutes with round 2 from UK Nationals.
Alright.
Sweet.
We were actually recorded that time.
Did that actually work, that one? So wait, was I going out with... I was going out with sound, wasn't I? That's fine, but the game was sound. That's good, because I was just saying, I got tweets from... To say was, look on that shows how loudly you're coming through. But I didn't talk...